Welcome back to The Creepy Walker. Settle in, get comfortable, and let these stories carry you somewhere quiet. Every story here is made for one purpose, to help you drift off and fall asleep. No jump scares, just slow, dark, and cozy storytelling right before bed. If you enjoy what I do here, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment, letting me know where you're listening from. I love seeing where you all are from. I don't run any ads on this channel. Not a single one. These videos are completely free for you, and I want to keep it that way. If you'd ever like to support me financially, I have a Patreon. The link is pinned in the comments and in the description below. Even the smallest support means everything and keeps this channel alive. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let's walk. So I had this camper van. That's the part you need to know first. I bought it off a guy in Rockland, Maine, fall of 2019. He was a marine mechanic, retired, older guy. He'd had the van for years, used it to haul parts up and down the coast. I don't know why he sold it. He didn't say, and I didn't ask. It was cheap enough that I wasn't going to push it. $1,200. Cash. He handed me the keys in his driveway and went back inside, and that was the whole transaction. I needed somewhere to sleep for the winter. I had a job lined up repairing lobster traps for one of the operations out of the harbor. It was indoors work mostly, a big shed that smelled like salt and old rubber. The kind of work where you get good at it fast, because it's all the same motion repeated. I'd done it a couple seasons before in different places. It wasn't interesting, but it paid and I could save most of it because I had no rent. The van was how I had no rent. There was a public boat launch a little ways from the harbor, and nobody used it once September came. I started parking there at night. Nobody told me to leave. Nobody really came around. The harbor itself cleared out fast once tourist season was over. By 6 in the evening in October, you could stand on the main dock and hear the chains on the empty slips moving in the water. Gulls. That was about it. So that's the setup. I was sleeping in the van near the water, working during the day, coming back at night. That's all I was doing. The first time I saw the figure, I didn't think anything of it. I was sitting in the back of the van. I had a little battery lamp. I was eating something out of a can. I looked out the rear window, and I could see down toward the mudflats. It was low tide, and there was somebody out there, bent over, moving slow, the way a person moves when they're digging. Clamming, I figured. Some people do it at night. I'd seen it before in other places. I looked for maybe 30 seconds, and then I stopped looking. Second night, same thing. Same area, roughly. Bent over figure. I thought it was the same person doing their thing. I didn't think about it. Third night is when it started being something I thought about. I had moved the van. Not far, maybe a quarter-mile south down the road. There was a spot I liked better because there was a little gravel pullout, and I could get the van more level. When I looked out toward the water that night, the figure was there again. Same distance out. Same position, bent over, slow movement. What I noticed, and I didn't put it together right away, was that it was in the same position relative to me. Like, it wasn't that the figure was in the same spot I'd been seeing it. It was directly offshore from where the van was now parked. I told myself that was just how I was perceiving it. Distance across mudflats at night is hard to judge. Fog was usually sitting out there. A shape out there doesn't have much to compare itself against, so you can't really tell where it is exactly. But I kept looking at it. And the more I looked, the more I thought, no, that's really directly across from where I am right now. I let it go. I went to sleep, but I thought about it the next day at the shed. I was replacing slats on traps, and I kept coming back to it. Not obsessing, just returning to it the way you do with something that doesn't quite add up. That night I parked in a third spot, maybe 1.5 miles north of where I'd started. Different cove, different angle to the water. I waited before I looked. I made myself do other things first. I charged my phone, I read for a while, I ate. Then around 11 I looked out toward the mudflats. The figure was there, directly across from the van. I sat with that for a while. I thought about explanations. I thought, maybe this is a different person, and this is just where people clam at night along this stretch. Maybe there's a good bed out there, and anyone who knows the area goes to the same general area at low tide. Maybe I was wrong about the distances. Maybe I was making a pattern out of something that wasn't a pattern. Those were all reasonable things. I went with those. I went with those for about 4 more nights. Then I decided to do something deliberate. I waited until after midnight. There had been a figure on the flats that night. I'd confirmed it before I started driving. I pulled out of the pullout and drove north. Not a little north. I drove almost 4 miles to a cove on the other side of a small headland. Different body of water, really. You couldn't see the area where I'd been parked from where I ended up. There was a dirt road that went down to a seasonal boat ramp that was locked up for winter, and I pulled in there and cut the engine. I sat there for a while before I looked. Maybe 15 minutes. Just sitting. Then I looked out at the water. Nothing there at first. Just the flats. Low tide. Wet mud reflecting the overcast sky a little. No figure. I watched for maybe 10 more minutes, and there was still nothing, and I started feeling like I'd proven something to myself. Like, okay, it's not what you were thinking. The figure is in one place, and you just kept parking near that place. That's all this is. Then something moved. It wasn't walking. That's the thing I want to say clearly. It wasn't that I spotted a figure walking around out there. What happened was that a shape that had been lying flat on the mud, or that's what I think now, a shape that was horizontal and low enough that I'd looked right past it. That shape slowly came upright. It took a while. It wasn't fast. It was like watching something unfold. And it ended up vertical, standing, out on the flats. I want to be accurate about distance. I couldn't see detail. It was far enough that it was just a shape. Dark, vertical, standing. That's all I can say about it. I was watching it, and I was trying to figure out how far out it was, and whether that matched with where someone could realistically be standing at low tide when I heard splashing. I want to say that again, because it's the part one keep coming back to. I heard splashing. Not occasional, not random. Continuous. The kind of sound that has a rhythm to it. And it was getting louder. It was coming toward shore. And I'm sitting there doing the math in my head about how far out the figure was, and how fast the splashing is getting louder, and those two things are not matching up. For the splashing to be getting that loud that fast, something would have to be moving at a speed that doesn't make sense across soft mud in the dark. Because it's not water out there. It's mud. You can't move fast in it. I'd seen guys working the flats during the day, and they move slow, and they have to think about each step, or they get stuck. I was still hearing the splashing getting louder when I started the engine. I want to be straight about that. I'm not going to say I sat there and waited. I didn't. I heard the splashing getting louder, and I started the engine, and I backed out of that boat ramp, and I got back on the road. I drove back to where I'd been parked before, my usual spot, and I sat in the van for a while with the engine running and the doors locked, which I want to point out is something I had not done before at any point that winter. After a while I turned the engine off. It was quiet. I was looking out at the water from the usual spot, and there was nothing on the flats. No figure. Tide was going out still. I need to say something about the tide, because it's the part one haven't been able to set aside. The tide was going out. That's important. Whatever I was hearing moving toward shore, it was moving toward shore while the tide was going out. I know what that means, and I know what it doesn't mean, and I'm not going to say it out loud, but I've thought about it a lot. The next morning I looked up tide charts and confirmed what I already knew, which is that yes, the tide was ebbing. Had been for a few hours when I was out there. I kept working the rest of the season. I slept in the van. I kept parking at the launch ramp, my usual spot. I didn't go back to that northern cove. A couple more times that winter I saw a figure on the flats at night, but I didn't do anything about it. I just looked at it for a minute, and then I didn't look anymore. I left in March when the work ran out. I sold the van before I left, actually. There was a guy who wanted it for parts or something. I didn't get much for it. Less than I paid. I didn't really care. The thing I keep not being able to explain, and I'm not saying this is more than it is, I'm just saying I can't explain it, is how far out that shape was when I first saw it come upright, and how fast the splashing was closing. Those two things together don't make sense no matter how I look at them, and I've looked at them a lot. I've talked to a couple people about it. Not many. Most people want it to be something. They want to tell you what it was. Seal, they say. Or someone messing with you. Or sound carries weird over water, and you were misjudging where it was coming from. Maybe. I don't know. The seal thing doesn't work for me because of how it came upright, but I understand why people say it. I get why people want an answer. I want an answer. I just don't have one. The last thing I'll say is this. When I sold the van, I took everything out of it, and in one of the storage compartments underneath the rear bench, I found some stuff the mechanic had left behind. A couple of rags, a flashlight that didn't work, and a logbook, like a little spiral notebook where he'd written down maintenance, oil changes, that kind of thing. In the back of the notebook, after all the maintenance stuff, there were a few pages where he'd written some notes. Not about the van. I'm not going to say what they were about exactly, but they were about that stretch of coast. And there were some dates, and next to a couple of the dates there were notes I didn't fully understand. One of them said, "Don't park north of the headland." I don't know when he wrote it. I don't know what he meant by it. He might have meant something completely practical, like the road gets bad, or the ramp floods, or somebody local doesn't like people parking there. I threw the notebook away. I probably shouldn't have, but I did. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. My wife and I drove north for about 3 weeks in the summer of 1999, and I need you to know that before I say anything else because the timing matters. She's fine. She's at home right now. I just want you to know that before I get into it. So, she had this idea about the camper van. We'd rented it from a guy in Sudbury who smelled like he'd been living in it himself, and it had these brown curtains with cigarette burns in them, and the heater worked about half the time, and she was genuinely excited about it. Her whole thing was that the cold air would help me sleep better. I'd been having these episodes, is what she called them when she was talking to me directly. Around other people, she didn't call them anything. She'd just change the subject, or say I'd been tired from work. The episodes were mostly just gaps. I'd lose maybe 10, 15 minutes here and there. I'd be driving, and then I wouldn't be. And then I would be again, and we'd be somewhere else. It wasn't falling asleep. It wasn't like that. I just looked down at my hands on the wheel, and know we'd crossed through another town without me being there for it. She knew about it. We didn't talk about it a lot, but she knew. The van had a bed in the back that folded down from a bench, and every morning she'd clip the curtains open with clothespins, these wooden ones she'd brought from home, and she'd make coffee on this little camp stove and hand it to me through the gap between the front seats. We had a road atlas that was already a few years old, and some of the roads in it didn't match what we were actually driving on. She navigated. I drove. That was how it worked. We went up through Ontario and into the Shield country, which is just rock and lakes and spruce trees, and the roads up there get bad pretty quickly once you're off the main ones. She liked the smaller roads. She said it felt more like actually going somewhere. I didn't argue with her about it. She was doing this trip for me, mostly, and I knew that. The thing I want to get to, the thing that I've been sitting on, it starts about 2 weeks in. Maybe a little more. We'd stopped somewhere. I don't remember the name of the town. It wasn't even really a town. More like a place where 2 roads met, and someone had put a gas station. We filled up, and she bought a paperback from a rotating rack near the door, and we drove another hour north until we found a place to pull off beside this old ski lift. The ski lift was not running. Obviously it was summer. It was just sitting there, the chairs hanging on the cable, wet from the fog that was coming in off the hillside, and the grass around the base of it was really long and wet, and there was nobody else around. She took her book and sat outside in one of those folding canvas chairs we kept in the back of the van. I said I was going to lie down for a bit. I remember lying down. I remember the curtains were clipped open on one side, and I could see her out there reading, her jacket pulled up around her neck because it was cold. That's the last thing I remember from that part. When I woke up, the van smelled like bleach. Really strongly. Like someone had cleaned something with a lot of it. She was already back inside, in the passenger seat, and she said I'd knocked over a bowl of soup while I was sleeping and she'd cleaned it up. I didn't remember soup. I didn't remember making soup. I didn't remember having soup. I didn't remember any part of soup. But the camp stove had been used. I could see that the pot was drying on the little rack she kept beside it, and there was a smell underneath the bleach that could have been tomato soup. Could have been. I didn't say anything about it. That's a thing I should tell you. I got pretty good at not saying anything about the things I didn't remember, because saying something meant she'd look at me a certain way, and I didn't want her to look at me that way more than she already was. We drove another hour before we stopped for the night, pulled off on a forestry road that wasn't gated, and she made actual dinner, pasta with something from a jar, and we ate it and she did a crossword, and I looked out the window at the trees. It was getting dark around 10 up there. She went to bed, and I sat in the passenger seat for a while. At some point I looked down at my hands because I was going to crack my knuckles, which is a habit she hated, and I noticed the dirt under my fingernails. All of them, packed in pretty far, dark enough that it looked almost black. And my knees hurt. I hadn't noticed that until I noticed the dirt, and then I noticed my knees hurt, and I tried to think about why my knees might hurt. I couldn't come up with anything. She wasn't asleep yet. I could tell because of the way she was breathing. She made a particular sound when she was actually asleep, and she wasn't making it. When I looked back, she was watching me look at my hands. She reached over and turned up the radio. There was a local station we'd been picking up for the last hour or so. A lot of static, two men talking about road conditions, which roads were going to be closed for the rest of the season. She turned it up, and I turned back toward the window. Then one of the men on the radio said something about a hiker. I didn't catch all of it because of the static, but I heard the words missing and found and shallow and service road. I'm not going to pretend I heard more than I did. I heard those words and some other words around them I couldn't make out clearly. She didn't turn the radio down. She didn't say anything, but her hand stayed on the volume knob, just resting there, like she'd turned it up and then forgotten to take her hand back. I sat there trying to think about whether we'd been near any service roads recently. We'd been on a lot of roads I didn't have names for. The forestry road we were parked on was probably technically a service road. The road by the ski lift had been unpaved. I was going back through the last few days in my head and finding the usual gaps and trying to work out the geography of them. Here's the thing. I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking right now, and I'm not saying you're wrong to think it. I'm just telling you what I knew and what I didn't know, and the honest answer is I didn't know very much. The next morning she was up before me, and she'd already unclipped the curtains and clipped them back open, and made coffee, and she handed me mine, and said she thought we should turn around and head south. She said she missed her sister. Her sister lived in Guelph, and they talked on the phone every few days, and we'd been out of phone range for most of the trip. I said okay. We didn't talk about the radio. We didn't talk about my hands. About 2 hours south, I asked if we could stop so I could walk around for a bit. My knees were still stiff. She pulled into a rest stop, and I got out and walked to the edge of the lot where there were some trees, and I stood there for a while. My boots had dried mud on them. I hadn't noticed that either. The mud was in the treads and up around the ankles, and it had dried to a pale gray-brown color that was different from the dark dirt under my fingernails. I scraped some of it off with a stick and left it there and went back to the van. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling you this because I think I did something. I am telling you this because I genuinely do not know what happened during those gaps. I never knew. Before the trip, during the trip, after the trip, I never knew what was in them. They were just gone. My doctor at the time said it was a dissociative thing related to stress, and that the memory lapses were a symptom, not a cause. He said this in the kind of voice that means he was explaining something complicated in a simplified way, and I should not ask follow-up questions if I wanted to keep feeling okay. After we got home, I looked in the local papers for that area. I did this for about 3 weeks. I found one article about a missing hiker, but it was from 2 years before our trip, and the person had been found alive, just lost. I didn't find anything else. The camper van we returned to the guy in Sudbury, and he checked it over for damage and found a small tear in one of the curtains, not the cigarette burns, a new one, and charged us for it. I didn't know how it had gotten there. My wife and I still talk about that trip occasionally. It comes up the way trips do, when you're trying to remember when something happened, using it as a landmark. The summer we did that drive. She talks about the ski lift sometimes, how atmospheric it was, how she finished her whole book while I slept. She doesn't mention the soup, or the bleach, or the radio. I don't either. My knees still ache when it gets cold. That started after that trip, the knee thing. I didn't have that before. I don't know what it's from. There's one other thing. I found a photograph, maybe 8 months after we got back, in the pocket of a jacket I hadn't worn since the trip. It was from a disposable camera, developed, one of those drugstore prints. I don't remember taking any pictures on that trip. I don't think we even had a disposable camera. I can't account for where the photograph came from. It was a picture of trees. Just trees, spruce trees dark, taken from low down, like the camera was at knee height or lower. The ground in the foreground was wet. There was fog. That's all that was in it. I couldn't tell you where it was. There was nothing in it to tell you where it was. I put it back in the pocket, and I still have the jacket. I don't know why I kept it. I haven't shown it to her. I don't know what I'm asking you to do with any of this. I don't have a point I'm arriving at. I've just been carrying it around, and I needed to say it to someone who wasn't her, and you're the first person it made sense to say it to. And now I've said it, and I'm not sure it sounds the way it sounded in my head, which was clearer, I think, when it was just in my head. It seems like there's less to it than I thought there was going to be. So I was living out of my van for about 4 months in 2024. Not by choice exactly, more like it made sense financially. My company had us doing HVAC installs on warehouse builds outside Tulsa, and the drive from where I actually live would have eaten the whole paycheck in gas and time, so I just stayed on site. A lot of the crew did. 6 of us total parked behind this half-finished distribution center, just in a loose group in the gravel lot, and nobody said anything about it because the site foreman did the same thing his first few years, and I think he thought it was normal. The van I had was a Transit older, bought it off a guy in Broken Arrow who'd done it up for camping. It had a small kitchenette, a bed platform in the back, the whole thing. It wasn't bad. I'd done it before on shorter jobs. You get used to it, or you don't, and I did. Most of the other guys drank after shift. Not problem drinking, just the kind of thing that happens when you're tired and you don't have anywhere to go and there's nothing else to do. They'd sit on the tailgates and talk until 2 or 3 in the morning, and I could hear them through the van walls. I usually didn't join them. Wasn't a moral thing. I just don't drink much, and I was tired, and I had my phone, and I'd watch old sitcom reruns on it before I fell asleep. My speakers were blown, so I watched with the subtitles on, which is a weird way to watch television, but you get used to that too. So this was maybe 6 weeks into the job. Maybe 7. It was late summer still, but a storm had come through earlier that evening. One of those fast ones that just dumps water for 40 minutes and moves on, and after it went through the lot got quiet early. The other guys turned in sooner than usual. I remember noticing that because the quiet was different. Normally there was always at least one of them still up. You'd hear the murmur of talking, music from someone's truck radio, something. That night by 11 or so it was just rain dripping off the van roof, hitting the seam above the kitchenette in this small regular pattern. I wasn't asleep. I was still on my phone, on my back, the screen down low so it didn't light up the windows too much. I don't know why I did that. It was just a habit I'd gotten into, keeping the light inside the van low at night. Maybe just because I slept better without it. I don't know. So I heard the dripping. And I heard the gravel shift outside, which happens, it's a gravel lot. It settles after rain, animals, whatever. I didn't think anything of it. Then the van moved. Not a lot. Just a little dip at the back, like when someone steps on the rear bumper. If you've had a van or a truck, you know what that feels like from inside. It's a specific kind of movement. It had happened before when one of the guys sat on my bumper to talk, so I didn't panic. I just noticed it and figured somebody was up late and maybe wanted to talk or wanted something. Then the side door opened. Not fast. That's the thing I keep coming back to. It opened slowly. The latch on that door, if you just pull it normal, it makes a decent amount of noise, kind of a clunk. But if you lift the handle slightly while you're pulling it, you can get it open quiet. I knew that because I'd done it myself when I came in late and didn't want to wake anybody, like sound carried across a gravel lot anyway. But it was just a habit. The point is it's not something you figure out by accident. You have to know to do it, or you have to try it a few times and figure it out deliberately. Whoever opened the door did it the quiet way the first time. I put my phone face down on my chest. I don't know why I did that before I even processed what was happening, but I did, and I just stayed still. I was on the bed platform facing the back of the van, and the side door is just forward of the bed on the passenger side, so whoever came in would come in behind my head more or less, and I wouldn't be able to see them without turning over, which I didn't do. I could smell them before I heard them. It was a wet smell. Wet cardboard is the closest thing I can say. Cigarettes under that. Outside smell, like someone who had been outside in the rain for a while. I heard them come up the step, and I heard the floor of the van flex, which it does. It's an old van. The floor flexes when you stand on it. But there's a panel near the sink that's worse than the rest. It's loose. It makes a real distinct creak if you step on it. And I'd learned to step around it without thinking. This person stepped around it. Went right around it like they knew it was there. I don't know how to explain what that did to me in terms of what I was thinking, because I wasn't thinking much. I was just lying there noticing things. But I noticed that. I turned over. Very slowly. I made it look like I was just shifting in my sleep, which maybe I oversell. I don't know if it looked like anything. It was dark in the van. I got turned enough that I could look toward the front of the van through my eyelashes, and I could see a shape crouched down near the front seats. Not going through anything. Not opening the glove box. Not looking for something. Just crouched there. The cab has 2 seats up front, and there's a little space between them and the living area in the back. And this person was in that space, crouched, not moving. Not doing anything that I could see. Just in there. I don't know how long that was. I kept watching. My phone was still on my chest, and I was thinking about it, about whether I could get to my phone. And also I was thinking about the fact that there was nothing in the front of the van worth taking. My wallet was under the mattress I was lying on. My keys were in my jacket, which was on the mattress with me. So whatever they were there for, it wasn't the usual thing. That thought came and went. I don't know what I did with it. Then there were headlights. From the access road that runs along the east side of the lot. There's a road there that goes to the back of the site, and a vehicle came down it, slow, and the lights swept across the windshield as it turned, the way lights do when something's moving and turning at the same time. It only lit up the inside of the van for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. In that light, I could see the shape in the front. It was a person, a man, I think. I couldn't tell you much more than that except that he was crouched low and his face was turned toward me, toward the back of the van. Not toward the windshield, not toward the light, toward me. I don't know if his eyes were open. The light was gone too fast. And I could see through the van doors, which have those little windows in them, the long, thin ones. Through those windows, when the headlights came across, I could see someone standing in the lot outside the van. Standing maybe 10 feet back. Just standing there in the rain, not moving toward the van, not moving away. Standing there facing it. The headlights moved on. It went dark again. I didn't move. The guy in the front didn't move. I don't know about the one outside. I lay there and I watched the front of the van, and I couldn't see anything after the lights were gone. My eyes hadn't adjusted. And I was thinking things, but I couldn't tell you a sequence to them. It wasn't orderly. I was watching the door. I was listening. The rain was still dripping from the roof seam. I could hear that. After a while, I don't know how long, I heard the floor flex again. The step going back down. The door making the quiet version of its sound. Then nothing. I stayed on the mattress for a long time after that. I got my phone and I looked at the time, and it was 12:47, and then I lay there, and I didn't do anything until it was almost 4. I don't know what I was waiting for exactly. At some point I got up, and I looked out the window, and I didn't see anybody in the lot. The other vans and trucks were all there. The site was dark. I didn't go outside. In the morning I didn't say anything to the other guys. I thought about it, and I couldn't figure out how to say it in a way that made it a story that went somewhere. I still can't, really. I looked at the gravel on the passenger side of the van, and there were boot prints, but that could have been from any of us at any point. We all walked around each other's rigs. I did go around to the east side of the site that day at lunch, and I walked down the access road a ways. There's a cut in the fence line about a quarter-mile down where someone had gone through. The chain link was bent back. It had been bent back before I went down there. I could tell. It wasn't fresh. Could have been anything. Contractors cut through fences on job sites all the time for a shorter walk. I've done it myself. I drove out that weekend to a hardware store and bought a bar lock for the side door. The kind that goes across the inside, so the door can't be opened from outside even if the latch gives. I installed it that same day. I told one of the guys I'd had a raccoon get in, and he said he'd had the same problem, and that was the end of that conversation. I stayed on that job another 3 weeks, and nothing happened again. We finished the install, and the crew moved on, and I drove back home, and I put my stuff in storage, and stayed with my brother for a while. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. I've thought about what they could have been doing, and I have some ideas, but none of them feel right, like none of them fit all the parts at once. The part where he didn't take anything. The part where he knew the floor. The part where he was just crouched there doing nothing in the dark. Those 3 things together, I can't make into one thing that makes sense. I've worked construction my whole life, and I've slept on a lot of job sites, and that was the only time anything like that happened. I don't know if that means anything or not. My brother relapsed again in October of that year. That's the part you need to know first. He'd been clean for about 14 months, and then he wasn't, and his ex-wife called me because there was no one else to call. She had a storage unit outside North Platte, Nebraska, full of his tools, and she needed them out because she was selling the unit. She couldn't reach him, so she called me. I drove out in my camper van. It was a 1997 Ford E350 conversion. I'd put a bed platform in, a small propane burner, a cooler. I'd been living in it on and off for about 8 months at that point. I'm not going to get into why. The short version is that things had gotten difficult for a while. I don't need you to know more than that. The drive from Ohio to western Nebraska is about 17 hours. I broke it up. First night, I slept in a Walmart lot somewhere in Iowa. Got to North Platte the second afternoon. The storage unit wasn't going to be accessible until the following morning because of the arrangement the ex-wife had made with the facility. So I needed somewhere to stay 2 nights, maybe 3. I found the RV park on a phone app. $8 for dry camping, $12 for hookups. I took a hookup spot because my house battery wasn't holding charge properly. The park sat behind a grain elevator. I mentioned that because the elevator made noise all night. Metal settling or expanding or whatever it does. I'm still not sure how much of what I heard during those nights was the elevator and how much was something else. That matters later. Most of the park was permanent residence. Trailers on cinder block foundations. Little plywood porches, propane tanks on hose reels. People who actually lived there. There were maybe 6 or 7 spots for travelers passing through. I took one of those. I parked and leveled the van. The site sloped a little toward the road, so I put 2 of my leveling blocks under the rear driver's side tire and left the other 2 on the ground nearby, maybe 2 feet away, kind of scattered where I'd set them down while I was figuring out how much rise I needed. I plugged into the pedestal, ate something from the cooler, and went to sleep around 7 because I'd been driving since 6 that morning. The first night nothing happened that I noticed. I slept straight through, which was unusual for me in new places, and woke up at 6 and drove into North Platte to get a sense of where the storage facility was before I had to be there the next morning. There was a man in the park. I saw him the first evening. He wore one of those tan canvas jackets from a cattle auction, a sale barn of some kind, with a logo I never got a good look at. He was older, maybe 65. He stood under a corrugated awning attached to the laundry room and smoked. This was around 9 at night. When I walked past to use the bathroom, he looked at me and nodded once. Not in a way that invited anything. Just once, the way you'd acknowledge a door was there. I didn't think much about him. I had other things going on in my head. My brother, the tools, whether I could fit a disassembled table saw in a van that already had a bed in it. Second day, I drove out to the storage unit and spent the morning loading. There was more than the ex-wife had let on. Power tools, a disassembled table saw, several toolboxes, hand tools, levels, squares. It took most of the morning and into the early afternoon. I drove back to the park because I was tired and because I'd paid for 2 nights and wasn't going to waste it. When I got back to my spot and got out of the van, I noticed the driver's side mirror was angled differently than I'd left it, folded in a little toward the van. Not all the way in, just shifted, maybe 10 or 15 degrees inward from where I set it. I adjusted it back and stood there for a minute. The storage unit lot had been tight. I thought about whether I'd clipped something pulling out and not felt it, whether the mirror had caught a post or a corner and moved. That seemed possible. I went inside. I saw the leveling blocks when I went to check the rear tire pressure. The 2 blocks I'd left scattered on the ground were stacked. All 4 of them, actually, stacked neatly beside the rear driver's side tire. Not under it, just beside it, lined up, even. Same blocks. Same one with the broken corner. I picked them up and looked around. There were a few people visible across the park. The man in the auction jacket was under the awning. He was facing my direction. I couldn't tell if he was watching me specifically or just standing that way. He flicked ash from his cigarette into a can he was holding without looking at the can. Then he said that I sleep hard. Not as a question. More like he was confirming something he already knew. I didn't say anything back. I put the blocks in the van and got inside. I spent some time lying on the bed going through it. Kids in the park could have moved the blocks, someone's kid messing with things out of boredom. The mirror could have been anyone squeezing between vehicles. The comment about sleeping hard, maybe he'd walked past and heard something, snoring or the van rocking. Maybe he was making conversation in a clumsy way. Maybe it was just something people say in that part of the country that means something different than it sounds. I went through all of it. Then I went to sleep. Third morning, I drove into town for coffee because my propane was running low and I didn't want to waste it on the burner. I was gone maybe 45 minutes. When I got back, the roof vent was open. The vent on that van is a hand crank. You turn a handle and it lifts the panel. It does not open by itself. There's a screw mechanism. It doesn't move from wind or heat or the van shifting. I know I closed it the night before because it had rained. Not hard, but some, and I had closed the vent before I went to sleep. I was certain of that. The blanket near the foot of the bed was damp. Not soaked, just damp in a way that was consistent with rain coming in through an open vent while I slept and then while I was gone. I went through everything in the van. My bag, the tools, my laptop, a box of things I'd brought from Ohio. Nothing was missing. Nothing was in a different place, or nothing I could identify as being in a different place. I thought about leaving. I thought about going to the office and telling the woman there what I'd noticed, and asking if anyone had reported anything. I thought about all of that, and I didn't do any of it because when I tried to put it into words in my head it sounded like, someone keeps my van tidy and opens the window sometimes. I didn't have a thing I could hand to someone and say, here is what I am telling you about. That evening I was crouched behind the van checking the electrical hookup. The cord had been sitting loose at the pedestal, and I wanted to make sure it was seated right. While I was back there I got down lower to look at the undercarriage because I'd been having an issue with the rear running lights, and I wanted to see if there was a wire situation I could address without getting under it. I looked under the van, and in the gravel beside the undercarriage, on the side away from me, I saw knee prints. Both knees close together, the gravel displaced around them, and the ground underneath showing darker than the surrounding gravel. I stood up. I walked around and crouched on the other side and looked at them from closer. The darker ground beneath the displaced stones was still visibly different from the rest of the gravel. I don't know how long it takes for that to stop being visible. I don't have enough experience with gravel to put a time on it. Someone had been on their knees on the far side of my van looking up at the undercarriage. I looked up at the awning. The man in the auction jacket was not there. The chair was there, but he wasn't in it. The smell of cigarette smoke was coming from behind me, from the rear corner of the van or past it, from somewhere in that direction. I did not go around the back of the van. I got in the driver's door and locked it and sat in the front seat. I had my phone. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about who to call and what I would say. I thought about the police. I went through what I would tell them. Knee prints in gravel. A mirror that moved. Stacked blocks. A vent that was open. A man who said I sleep hard. None of that is a thing you call the police about. None of it individually is even something you tell another person about without feeling like you're not making sense. I sat in the front seat until it was fully dark. Then I moved to the back, and I did not sleep in the same way I had the night before. In the morning, he was under the awning when I started the van. I could see him from the driver's seat. He watched the van while I pulled out, the whole way to the exit. I know that because I was watching him in the mirrors. I stopped at the exit and sat there for a moment thinking about whether to go back to the office and say something. Then I pulled out onto the road. I drove back to Ohio with the tools. My brother was in a better place by the time I got there. The ex-wife got the unit cleared. That all worked out. I don't know who adjusted the mirror. I don't know who opened the vent or stacked the blocks. I've thought about whether I could have done some of it myself, half asleep, on autopilot. I don't have any history of that. The knee prints I can't work into anything that settles it for me no matter how long I sit with it. The thing that stays with me is the specific way he said it. Not that I was a noisy sleeper or that he'd heard me. That I sleep hard, which means he'd been close enough to know that. That's the part one keep coming back to. Either he was right there beside the van while I was asleep, or he'd done something to make sure he'd know. I've been using rest areas since then. Walmart sometimes. Not RV parks. I know that's probably an overreaction. I just haven't been able to stop thinking about what he was doing on his knees under there. So we were in Iceland. October 2022. I've mentioned the Iceland trip before, but I don't think I've ever told you what actually happened on the last night on the western coast roads. I've been sitting on this for a while. I'm just going to say it. Mina is my girlfriend. She does wildlife photography, mostly birds. She'd been wanting to go to Iceland for 2 or 3 years because of the seabird colonies on the western coast. Puffins, guillemots, a few species that only nest there. She'd been watching a couple of the sites on live stream cameras, and she wanted to get there before the winter closures started, which happened gradually through October, and then all at once in November when the road conditions get bad. Flights out of London were very cheap in October because most people don't want to go then, which was the whole reason we could afford it. We rented a camper van instead of hotels because Mina wanted to be able to pull over anywhere along the coast without having to get back to her room by a certain time. The van was a Toyota Hiace conversion. White, kind of beaten up. 2-burner propane stove, fold-down bed, a little table with bench seating that was stable until you actually leaned on it. The overhead cabinets didn't latch correctly, So every time we hit a significant bump, you'd hear things shifting around up there, dishes, or whatever was in there knocking together. We'd figured out by about day 3 which roads to slow down for and which ones were fine. We'd been in the country around a week by the time we reached the western coast. The photography had been going well. Mina had several thousand frames she was working through each evening while I drove or read or messed with the propane, which had a temperamental igniter. She'd sit at the folding table with her laptop and her headlamp clipped to the cabinet above her, and I'd hear the soft sound of the card reader, and occasionally she'd say something to herself about a frame, but mostly she was quiet. She has this habit, she's had it as long as I've known her, of humming 3 notes when she's concentrating on something or when she's a bit anxious. It's not a song. It's just 3 notes, going up then down, and she repeats them. I'd stopped consciously registering it after the first few days. It was just there, the way background sounds are. It only matters because of when it stopped. The night this happened, we were on a coastal road heading north. Gravel, single track in some places, maybe 2 tracks wide in others. It was around midnight. In October in Iceland around midnight, it's not actually dark. It's this heavy blue color, like the last 20 minutes of dusk, but it doesn't progress anywhere. The ocean was on our right side, and the lava fields were on the left, and you could see clearly maybe 70 or 80 meters ahead, and then the road just went into the blue and you lost it. It had been raining hard since around 9 or 10, sideways rain driven off the ocean, and the wipers were working fast, and it still wasn't enough. Mina kept having to wipe the passenger window clear with her sleeve because the inside kept fogging. She'd rub a circle, look out for a bit, then fog again, rub again. I had the defroster on full, but the window on her side ran cold because the passenger vent wasn't working right. We hadn't seen another vehicle since before the rain started, which was probably an hour or more at that point. The road had gotten narrower as we moved north. At some point the lane markings just stopped, and it was 2 ruts of gravel with the shoulder dropping off to lava rock on both sides. I was doing maybe 50, a bit under, because the road had started doing unexpected things, small drops, unexpected jogs left or right, and the headlights only showed you so far ahead. Then the van dipped. 1 tire, just slightly off the shoulder and back. I corrected. Normal thing on that kind of road. But when I corrected, I looked left to check the edge, and I caught movement in the lava field. Something alongside the van on the driver's side, moving with us. I want to say what I saw accurately because I've been over this a lot, and I don't want to fill in things that weren't there. At first it was low, around the height of a large dog, but the proportions were wrong. I couldn't have told you in that moment what made the proportions wrong, just that they were. It was moving alongside us and keeping our speed, which at that point was close to 50 kilometers per hour, keeping pace on lava rock, in the dark and the rain. I looked back at the road. You have to watch the road. When I looked left again, the thing was tall. In the time I'd looked at the road, seconds, it had become a completely different size. I don't know the exact height. The driver window is a vertical strip, and the thing was occupying most of that strip, still keeping pace. The way it moved was not smooth. It was lurching, is the only word I keep coming back to. It rose and moved forward at the same time, like something navigating uneven terrain, but maintaining direction and speed anyway. The motion reminded me of a moose trying to get out of deep snow, that kind of heaving forward movement. Except there are no moose in Iceland. There's nothing large on the western coast. No livestock that far from any visible farm. No trees, nothing. You can look it up. The western lava fields don't have large animals. I was still driving. I kept us on the road and watched ahead and watched left in pieces, which is why what I can tell you is incomplete and comes in pieces. I heard breathing. I know how that sounds. I'm telling you what I heard. It was under the engine sound somehow, or alongside it, wet and heavy and close. Not echoing, which is the part that got me then, and still does when I think about it. Something echoes when it's at a distance. This didn't echo. It sounded like it was close enough to be inside the van, which it wasn't, which I understood at the time and still understand now. I'm not telling you it was inside the van. I'm telling you it sounded close. Mina had stopped humming. I don't know the exact moment she stopped. I just registered the absence of the 3 notes and understood from that something had changed for her too. The shape was alongside my window for maybe 6 seconds. I counted it out afterward in my head, and 6 seconds is my best estimate. Then I put my foot down, hard enough that things rattled loose in the cabinets above the kitchen. The road curved inland. Not sharp, just a gradual bend. and the headlights swung across open lava field, and there was nothing there. I watched the left side for the next stretch, and there was nothing. Black rock and rain, and the ocean receding behind us. I didn't slow down. I was going to keep the speed up and watch the road. I wasn't sorting through explanations yet. I was just driving. Then Mina said something. The substance of it was, "Don't slow down. Don't reduce speed." I asked why. She was looking at the passenger side mirror, not out the window, the mirror. She told me there was another one behind us. I did not look in my rearview mirror. I've thought about whether I should have, and I don't know the answer, and it doesn't change anything. I kept my eyes forward. I don't know what Mina saw reflected in that mirror. I know that she kept watching it for somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes, because I was counting seconds inside my head and tracking the time, and she did not look away from that mirror once during those 2 or 3 minutes. At some point she shifted in her seat, and I could tell from the change in her posture that she had stopped watching. We drove another 40 minutes without speaking before I pulled into a small gravel campsite with a few other vans already parked there. I cut the engine. Mina opened her laptop, but she wasn't doing anything with it. The screen just lit the inside of the van. I got the propane burner going on the 3rd try and made coffee. I don't know how long we sat. Eventually we slept. In the morning I walked out to look at the road from the campsite entrance. In daylight the lava field on the inland side was completely visible, going back a good kilometer to a low ridgeline. Flat, open, no cover. At night with the headlights on, anything moving on that ground should have had its eyes catch the light. Animals reflect headlights. You see it on normal roads at home all the time. I didn't see eyes. I didn't see any reflection at all from that side of the road. The next day Mina went out along the coast with her camera, and I stayed with the van. She came back in the afternoon with a full card of frames. That night she was at the table editing, and I could hear the 3 notes, the humming, back again. We didn't talk about it until the airport. We were waiting for our flight in those hard plastic seats, and she brought it up herself. She told me she'd had her laptop open and had been working through photos the whole time it was happening. She'd looked up because she heard me accelerate hard, and when she looked up she looked out the passenger window and described what she saw as right there. Those were her words. Right there, close to the glass on her side. Then she looked in the mirror because she wanted to see if it was still following, and she said it was behind us, and she kept watching because she wanted to know when it stopped. She said it stopped before we reached the campsite. I've tried since then to find any reports from those roads, anything that matches what we saw. I haven't found anything that fits specifically. There's Icelandic folklore about the highlands and the interior, about things that live in the lava fields, but nothing that was specifically about the western coast roads at night, and nothing that was about something moving alongside vehicles. I've tried to match what I heard to normal things. Large Icelandic sheep make sounds that carry in bad weather. Seals are along that coast, and seals make strange sounds, nothing like what you'd expect. I don't know how a seal sounds coming through a van window in a rainstorm. I don't know if seals cross lava fields. What I can't explain is the pacing. Whatever was out there was matching our speed. That's the part one keep returning to. Not what it was, not the size of it. The fact that it was keeping pace at 50 kilometers an hour over broken ground in the rain without any visible effort, rising and falling and staying right there alongside the van. And when I accelerated, it was behind us. Mina published a selection of images from the trip in a wildlife photography journal the following spring. Gannets, storm petrels, a few of the guillemots she'd specifically gone for. When she got the acceptance letter, she was pleased in a quiet way, and I was pleased for her. I asked her once if she'd looked back through the frames from that night, the ones she'd been editing when it happened, to see if anything had come through the passenger window in the background. She said she'd gone through all of them. I asked what she found. She said she'd looked. She didn't say anything past that, and I let it go. My divorce finalized in April of 2015, and by June I had taken my son out of school 6 weeks early, and we were driving north in a camper van I'd borrowed from my uncle without asking him exactly right. My son was 9. His name is Callum. He's fine now. I want to say that up front, he's fine. He's 16 and he's fine. But I still think about those 3 weeks more than I think about most things, and I've never actually told anyone the whole of it, so I'm going to try. The van was a 98 Flare, maybe 30 feet tan, and it smelled like my uncle's dog, even though my uncle hadn't owned a dog in probably 4 years. The back had a fold-out table and a bench seat and a little galley kitchen, and then a sleeping area behind a curtain. 2 beds. Callum slept in the back one, and I slept in the one closer to the kitchen. I told Callum we were testing routes for a travel blog. I don't know why I said that. There was no travel blog. I just needed something that sounded like a reason, because I didn't have a real one. He accepted it completely, which was either because he was 9 or because he understood more than I thought and was being kind to me. I still don't know which one. He had a road atlas he'd bought at a gas station in Duluth with his own money, a big paper one, and he started marking every gas station we stopped at with a green marker. Just a circle around the dot on the map. By the end of the first week, the atlas looked like it had a rash. He'd sit at the fold-out table and do that while I drove, and sometimes he'd ask me things I didn't know how to answer. Not kid questions. Things like how deep do lakes go in winter, meaning does the cold go all the way down or does it stop somewhere? I told him I didn't know. He'd write something in the margin of the atlas and move on. We stayed on logging roads mostly because actual campgrounds cost money, and I didn't have a lot of money at that point. Logging roads are legal to park on in most of those states if you're not blocking anything, and you leave when they tell you to, which nobody ever told us to. We'd pull off somewhere flat, and that was it for the night. Callum thought this was excellent. He kept saying we were pioneers, which was something he'd gotten from school. For the first 4 days, or so, everything was normal. We'd drive, we'd stop, he'd mark the atlas, I'd make something on the little stove, we'd sleep. I was not sleeping well, but I wasn't expecting to sleep well, and I didn't think much about it. On the 4th or 5th day, I noticed the spoons were in the wrong drawer. I want to be careful about how I say this because it sounds small. It is small, but I had been the one putting things away since we left, and I knew where I put the spoons, and they were not there. They were in the drawer where I kept the can opener and the bottle opener and a lighter. That is a different drawer. I took the spoons out and put them in the right drawer and didn't say anything to Callum because it was spoons and there was nothing to say. The next morning my boots were turned toward the door. I always take my boots off pointing away from the door because you put them on by bending down and it's easier to grab them if they're facing you. I've done it that way for probably 15 years. They were facing the door. Toward it, not away. I turned them around and put them on and drove. I don't know how many days passed between that and when Callum asked about his backpack. Maybe 2 days. Maybe 4. I had started to lose track of days by then, which I want to mention not as a complaint, but as a fact because it's relevant to what I'm trying to describe. We were not keeping a schedule. There was no reason to know what day it was. But it wasn't just days. I'd drive for what felt like 2 hours and check the mileage, and we'd have gone 20 miles. Or I'd think we'd been parked for 1 night and count back through the gas receipts, and it would be 2 nights. I thought it was stress. I thought it was the divorce, or not sleeping, or just the fact that every day looked like the day before it because we were always in trees. Callum's backpack was a blue one, canvas. He kept his drawing things in it, and his atlas when he wasn't using it. He asked me one morning at breakfast why I had moved it during the night. I said I hadn't moved it. He said it was on the floor on my side of the curtain when he woke up, and he hadn't put it there. I said I didn't know. He looked embarrassed after that. Like he'd asked something he shouldn't have. I didn't like that. I didn't like that he thought it was something he should be embarrassed about, because it wasn't, and I didn't know how to tell him that without making it a bigger thing than it was. I checked the van door that night. The lock was fine. The windows were all shut. I walked around the outside of the van once, and there was nothing. We were parked off a road that I hadn't seen another vehicle on in at least a day and a half. I went back inside and went to sleep. This is the part I've been working up to, the quarry. I don't know exactly how many days into the trip this was. Maybe 12, maybe 15. We'd come off a logging road onto a county road and followed it until a smaller road split off, and I took that because it looked like it went somewhere flat. It went to a quarry. Flooded, long abandoned. The water was brownish green and high, almost to the lip of the rock in some places. There was a parking area, gravel, and then the trees started and they were mostly pine, and they were bent, all in the same direction, from wind I guess, though there wasn't much wind that evening. The air had a smell to it. Sharp, I don't know how else to describe it. Not pine, something underneath the pine. We parked and Callum looked at the quarry for a while and asked if people swam in it, and I said I didn't know, and he said it looked cold, and I said it probably was. He ate cereal for dinner because I didn't feel like cooking, and he didn't complain. He fell asleep early, before 9, with the atlas open on his chest. I could see him through the curtain. I left the curtain open because I didn't like not being able to see him that night for some reason. I don't know what reason. I sat at the fold-out table and looked at the window, but it was dark and all I could see was my own reflection. I turned the light off so I could see out. The quarry was dark and flat, and the pines around it were these black shapes. Nothing moving. I fell asleep at the table, and then woke up back in my bed, which means I must have moved there at some point, but I don't remember doing it. This happened at 2 in the morning. I know because I looked at my phone. I woke up because I had the sensation that the van was moving. Not driving, the engine wasn't on. More like it was settling, swaying slightly and then stopping. I lay there and waited, and it didn't happen again. There was water dripping from the ceiling vent above the sink. Slow, single drops, hitting the counter every few seconds. I got up and looked at it. The vent was closed. I opened it and closed it again, and the dripping slowed down but didn't stop for a while. I don't know where the water came from. It hadn't rained. I stood there and listened to it drip, and then I heard footsteps outside. On the gravel, slow. One step, and then a pause, and then another step. Moving along the side of the van, the passenger side, from the front toward the back. Slow enough that each step was separate. I stood in the kitchen area and listened and counted maybe 8 or 9 steps, and then they stopped. There was no other sound. I stood there for a while. I don't know how long. The dripping from the vent had mostly stopped by then. I was thinking about whether to open the door. I was thinking about what I would see if I did. I was thinking about whether whatever was out there on the gravel had stopped because it reached the back of the van, or because it heard me moving inside, or because it had just stopped. I didn't open the door. I was standing in the dark between the kitchen and the curtain, and Callum spoke from somewhere near the front seats. He said, "Dad, why were you outside before?" Not a question exactly. The way he said it. Why were you outside before? I said I hadn't been outside. I said it quietly, and I went to where he was, and he was sitting in the passenger seat, which was swiveled around to face the back, and he had his atlas in his lap, and he was looking at me. I asked him why he was up there. He said he heard the door and thought I'd gone outside. I asked him what time. He said he didn't know. He said it was before he fell asleep, which would have been before 9. I told him I hadn't gone outside. I told him the door makes that sound sometimes when the temperature changes. I don't know if that's true. He looked at the atlas, and then looked at me, and then he went back behind the curtain, and I heard him get into his bed. I sat in the driver's seat for the rest of the night. I watched the quarry and the trees. I didn't see anything. At some point it got light, and I started the van, and we left without eating breakfast, and Callum didn't ask why we were leaving early, and I didn't explain it. We drove for most of that day, and stopped at a town that had a diner, and I bought him pancakes, and we sat there for a long time, and I drank a lot of coffee, and he marked the town on the atlas. He'd started drawing small stars next to places he wanted to come back to. He put a star on that town. I have tried a few times to figure out where the quarry was. I know roughly what county it was in. I've looked at maps online, and there are a few flooded quarries in that area, and I can't tell which one it was. I thought about calling the county and asking if anyone had ever reported anything at one of those quarries, which I know sounds ridiculous, and I haven't done it. I checked my phone the next morning for anything useful, anything that would tell me if I'd gone outside between 9 and 2. I don't know what I thought I'd find. There was nothing. The boots, the spoons, the backpack. I don't know if those are part of the same thing, or if I'm just putting them together, because it's easier to have one story than 3 separate ones. I moved a lot of things without remembering during that trip. I moved myself from the table to the bed at some point, and have no memory of it. It's possible I moved other things. It's possible Callum moved the backpack himself, and forgot, and was embarrassed about forgetting. The footsteps I cannot explain. I have tried. There was no reason for anyone to be at that quarry at 2 in the morning. There was no other vehicle. Whatever made that sound on the gravel did it slowly and deliberately, 8 or 9 steps, along the passenger side, and then it stopped. And someone had been outside before 2 in the morning, according to Callum. Before he fell asleep, he'd heard the door. We got home about a week after that. My uncle's place, that's where I returned the van. Callum wanted to keep the atlas, and I let him. He's still got it, I think, in his room somewhere. I've thought about asking him what he remembers about the trip, but I haven't. He was 9. He's 16 now, and I don't know what he'd say, and I don't know what I'd do with it if he remembered more than I do, or less. The job paid cash, which meant the guy I worked for, the shop owner out of Riverside, he could tell me to sleep in my van at truck stops instead of getting a hotel, and I would do it because that was the deal. This was 2007. I was hauling custom motorcycles for him in a converted camper van with a trailer hitch and a flatbed I'd pull behind it depending on the size of the load. Most weeks I was gone Tuesday through Friday. Sometimes longer if there was a pickup on the way back. The van was mine. He paid me per delivery plus fuel. The setup worked because I already had the van and I needed money, and he needed someone who wouldn't ask questions about the paperwork on some of the bikes. I'm not saying anything illegal was happening. I'm just saying that was the part of the arrangement nobody talked about out loud. So I slept in parking lots and rest stops and truck stops depending on where I was and what time it got to be. I kept a gym bag. I kept food in a cooler. I had a little folding table I could eat at. It was fine. I'd done worse. The night I'm telling you about, I was coming back from a drop in 29 Palms. Empty trailer, just me, heading back toward the 10. There's a rest stop off Route 62 somewhere east of the park. I don't remember exactly where, maybe 40 minutes past the turnoff. I'd stopped there before. It's one of those places that exists because there's nothing else for a long stretch. Parking lot, bathrooms, couple vending machines, a covered area with some benches. That's it. Desert on every side. I pulled in around midnight maybe. I was tired enough that I didn't want to push it to the next truck stop, which I think was back on the 10 somewhere around Chiriaco Summit. I parked near the vending machines because the light made me feel better about where I was, which sounds like a small thing, but when you sleep in a van you think about that kind of stuff. You park under lights. You park where other vehicles are. You don't park at the far end of the lot away from everything. There were 3 other vehicles when I got there. A semi parked way back near the edge of the lot with its marker lights on. A minivan parked near the bathrooms. And a sedan older, maybe a Civic or a Corolla, parked kind of diagonally like the person hadn't really committed to a space. I didn't look hard at any of this. I ate something. I moved to the back of the van to get ready to sleep. I had a bed back there, a real mattress I'd cut down to fit, and cabinets on either side, and a little storage situation under the bed where I kept things. I had a case under a blanket that I kept there. Not a gun case. It looked like one, but it wasn't. I kept it there because it looked like one. The woman I noticed first because of the laughing. I was still up, doing something, I don't remember what, and I could hear voices outside near the bathrooms. A man's voice kind of raised. Not yelling, but getting there. And then this laughing, short and through the nose, not like something was funny, just like a sound someone makes. I looked out the side window, and there was a woman standing near a trash can watching a man argue with another guy near the bathroom entrance. The other guy I didn't know. He was older, had a shirt with something written on it. I couldn't read it. The man from the sedan, the boyfriend or husband or whatever, he was doing most of the talking, and he kept rubbing his stomach through his shirt. Not like he was in pain. More like a habit. The older guy eventually just walked away and got in the minivan and left. That part one figured was nothing. People argue at rest stops. It's hot, it's late, people are tired. I was mostly asleep when the knock came. Quiet knock, 2 times. I looked at the clock, and it was a little after 1. I did not open the door. I cracked the side window and asked what was needed, and the woman, the same one from before, asked if I had any water to spare. She said they hadn't brought enough, and the vending machine didn't have any left. I looked at the vending machine from where I was. There was water in it. I could see the bottles. I went to the door anyway. I cracked it, but not all the way. She was there alone. She had a smell about her, peppermint gum, and underneath that something like gasoline. Not overpowering, but there. I took a bottle from the cooler and handed it through the gap. She thanked me, and then she didn't leave. She was looking past me into the van. Not quickly, not like she was being subtle about it. She was just looking. At the back where the bed was. At the cabinets. At the shape under the blanket. She asked if I was alone in there. I said my cousin was sleeping. She nodded. She left. I did not sleep after that. I sat up in the driver's seat with the van running, and I watched the lot. The boyfriend came out of the bathroom at some point, and they talked near the sedan, and I watched that. The sedan had been parked there the whole time. I didn't see anything wrong with it. They got in it eventually, and I figured they were leaving, and I almost relaxed. Around 2, maybe a little past, headlights came on behind the van. I could see them in the mirrors. The sedan had moved. It was now angled sideways across the exit lane with the hood up. The boyfriend was outside waving both arms. The woman was standing near the front of the car with her hands at her sides. The exit lane was the only way out. The entrance was a one-way in. If I wanted to leave, I had to go past them or go over a curb and through a patch of landscaping, and I didn't know what was on the other side of that, whether the trailer would clear it. I put the van in reverse to get a better look at my options, and that's when I saw the other vehicle. It was parked out past the edge of the lot, facing in, lights off. I almost didn't see it. I saw it because of the exhaust. My reverse lights lit up the ground, and I could see exhaust coming off the back of whatever it was. Sitting there running with the lights off, pointed at the rest stop. I sat there and watched the woman walk toward the driver's side of my van holding the water bottle I'd given her an hour before. She walked slowly. She wasn't rushing. I put the van in drive, and I went over the curb. The trailer bounced hard, and something in the back fell and broke, and I didn't care. There was a shallow ditch on the other side, and I bottomed out going through it, and then I was on the shoulder of the road. I turned onto 62 heading west. I drove until I got to the 10, and then I drove east on the 10 to Chiriaco Summit, and I sat in the truck stop there until it was light. I didn't see the sedan again. I didn't see the other vehicle on the road. At the truck stop, I walked around the van and the trailer to check what I'd broken going over that curb. The trailer had a bent something on the left rear corner, a bracket, not the hitch. The trailer was fine. The van had a scrape along the underside on the driver's side, but nothing that would keep it from running. I sat in the truck stop diner for a long time after that. I had coffee. I thought about whether there was anything to report and what I would say if I did. I had not seen anything happen. The car was broken down. The woman asked for water. Someone was parked in a dark lot with their car running. None of that is a thing you call about. I thought about the older guy from the bathroom argument, the one who'd left in the minivan. He'd left before the sedan blocked the exit. I wondered where he'd gone. I don't know why that part stayed with me. I thought about the vending machine. There had been water in it. I'd seen the bottles. The shop owner asked about the bracket on the trailer, and I told him I'd clipped something backing up. He docked it for my next check. That was the end of it from his side. I kept doing the job for another 4 months after that. I kept sleeping in rest stops, sometimes when it was the practical thing to do. I never stopped at that particular one again. I went out of my way a couple times to avoid it, which added time, and I told myself that was just a preference thing. Certain places you don't want to be at certain hours. That's not unusual. Everybody has those. The thing I kept coming back to for a while after was the exhaust. If you're parked in a dark lot with your lights off, you're not running your engine unless you're going somewhere soon, or unless you don't want anyone to notice you're there, but you need the AC on. It was hot enough that night that the second thing made sense. But you'd still turn your lights on before you moved, unless you didn't want anyone to see you move. I don't know what they were doing out there. I don't know if the three of them knew each other, or if the one in the dark lot was just someone parked with their lights off for their own reasons. I don't know if the broken down car was actually broken down. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gotten out to help them. I think about the woman walking toward my door holding that empty water bottle. Not the asking for water part. The walking toward the door after, with the bottle, when she already had water. I don't know what you do with the empty bottle in that situation. I don't know why you'd be holding on to it. That's the part one still don't have an answer for, and I'm not sure I'm going to get one.